Hello everyone, and welcome to my full in-depth guide to Diana mid. Now, I haven't made a champion guide in some time, but I had so much fun playing Diana on my unranked master melees only challenge that I thought I would go ahead and make a guide for her. So if you guys are unfamiliar with how I do these, everything will be timestamped in the description below, and by the end of it, you'll have a very good idea of everything you need to know in order to play Diana. So we'll start off with Diana's identity. Now, Diana's a little bit all over the place because she's actually just good at a whole bunch of different things. I think the best way to describe her is kind of like half assassin, half bruiser. She does a lot of damage, but she's also pretty tanky. And that's really good because it makes her quite forgiving. You know, it's one of the assassins or melees that I would recommend to people that are new to the class and they want to, get in and play those sort of champions, and also it kind of acts as a stepping stone to if you do want to play some things later on, some of the more difficult assassins or more difficult bruisers. She's also quite nice because aside from the forgiveness of just naturally being, an easier champion, she's also forgiving in the fact that like she can farm from range, right? Like there's not that many melees that can farm from range, and what that often means is like if you make mistakes in the early laning phase, you're going to be in a bit of trouble. But Diana has the ability to fire from range. She is tanky, got a variety of builds and win conditions. So overall, it's a great champion to play. I really do think she's one of the more blindable melee mids, which is super nice. A pretty good one trick, can be played in multiple roles, and overall very strong. So definitely a champion that I think you guys can look into learning. So let's start out with Diana's itemization. Now, there's a few different paths you can go. So there's kind of like a full assassin path, there's a full like kind of bruiser path, and then there's something kind of a little bit in between. So we'll kind of talk about it. So for your first item, you have three choices. You've got Lichbane, Rocket Belt, and then mask items. Now, if you're not sure, I would just say go Rocket Belt. The thing is, you can't really go wrong with Rocket Belt. It's got a really powerful build path, and the stats on it are very nice for how little it costs. And it's going to be good in almost every situation. You know, having a dash is never really bad. In bad matchups, the extra HP can be good. In good matchups, the extra HP obviously still makes you harder to kill, right? Like you can potentially play more aggressively with it. So it's just a really, really good item in general. Now, you might want to go Lichbane as a greedier option. So Lichbane lets you do more damage at the cost of tankiness, and it's also quite good if you're really certain you can snowball in the side lane, or if they just like lack CC in team fights. So definitely a greedier option, but something you can go for. Now, these items do also lead to different second items, which I'm going to talk about, but we'll come back to that. Now, your third option is to go some sort of mask item. So mask items and the mask build in general is really, really good when the enemy team either just like lacks damage in general, they lack the DPS in order to get through your HP, or if they're really high on burst and you just need to survive. So which mask item you build first is going to kind of depend on what exactly you're playing against. So let's say you're playing against some sort of tank, right? If you're playing against a tank, like something that doesn't have a lot of DPS and is just going to try and CC you and then get bursted down during the CC, and that sort of situation, you might want to go for Liandry. So like if you're playing against something like Galio, you might want to rush Liandry. Now, if you were playing against an assassin instead, right, so in this case, it's burst damage, but not burst damage that has a lot of HP, you would probably build Riftmaker first. Now, you're going to build the other item afterwards anyway, but just kind of realize that that first item slot is flexible when it comes to the mask items. Okay, so moving over to our second items, it does depend a lot on like what you went for your first item. So first off, if you went a mask item, you're going to want to build another one. So like if you went Liandry Riftmaker, we're going to then build the other one second. That's pretty easy. Now, if you went Lichbane, you have some options. So you can continue to just build more damage. So for example, you can go Lichbane into Shadow Flame, right? That gives you just like a lot of straight up bursts. It's really, really powerful. You can also go Storm Surge here if you like, although I don't like Storm Surge as much of an item. You can do that. You can go Lichbane into Zhonya, which is still pretty good. So Zhonya's is a really good item on Diana in general, since you are going to be dashing forward into the enemy team. And yeah, overall, this is like a very good option too. It's especially useful if you have like high Dark Seal stacks or you have like a bounty or something, to where like, yeah, you've gone for this full aggressive and you have managed to snowball, but like maybe now coming into team fights, we're going to need a little bit more safety. So with Lichbane, it's pretty easy. You just go into burst or you go into a bit of safety. Now, with Rocket Belt, it's a little more complicated. So if you do go Rocket Belt, which again is going to be our default, you have to be very careful not going damage second. So what do I mean by that? If you buy Rocket Belt and then you buy Zhonya, you are going to be very tanky, but you're also going to lack a lot of damage. And sometimes that can be fine. Like if you're ahead enough that your base damages can carry you, or your team itself is like really high on damage, or let's say the enemy team only has one significant threat and all you need to do is live that, then again, that can be fine. But the risk you run is going something like, you know, Rockabelt Zonya, like 2 items with low AP, not any particularly damaging effects, and then just really lacking damage in general and being unable to carry the game. So typically, if I go Rockabelt, I don't often go Zonya second. Although, again, you can. It depends on the game, but I prefer not to. Now, if you go Rockabelt second, what that opens you up to is you can, or sorry, if you go Rockabelt first, what that opens you up to is going Lichbane second, which I quite like. I think Rockabelt into Lichbane, so essentially you would go Rockabelt into damage, and that can either be Shadow Flame or Storm Surge, like if you want the flat pen against squishies, or it can be Rockabelt into Lichbane if you're playing against you know, things that are a bit tankier, you know, or if you just like want more scaling. So that's the only thing really to be careful of there, is not building too defensively, especially when you don't need it, right? Like a lot of this build, you're going to have tools to deal with that anyway. You've got things like Phase Rush, so just be very, very careful of that. So to make that simple, go Lichbane into basically whatever you want here, depending on game. Rockabelt normally into damage, either early game or scaling, and then yeah, just get these mass builds. Now, for our third and fourth items, it's pretty much always going to be Death Cap and a pen item. So again, if you're playing the mask build, you'll just go for Bloodletter here. It's pretty simple. If you're playing any other build here, you'll probably play for Void as your pen item. And obviously, Death Cap is really good. So the way to kind of decide which one you want first, Death Cap is really, really good just in general. Like especially if you have high Dark Seal stacks or you're playing something like Lichbane that has an AP ratio on it. If they have a lot of matter resist, then you probably want to build the pen item first, but I would actually say this doesn't happen that often. So most of the time, I would find myself going Death Cap third and then a pen item fourth. With the mask build, you might go the pen item third and then Death Cap fourth, just because you don't have as much AP. So that's pretty simple. And then finally, let's talk about these situational items here. So we talked a little bit about this, Zonya and Banshee. Zonya, if you don't buy it second, you should probably buy last. So as you get to this fifth item here, you'll probably want to buy Zonya. It's pretty difficult to play Diana in the late game without Zonya, because you're just, even though you're tanky, you're just not mobile enough in order to avoid, you know, just getting CC'd in one-shot late game. So I'd really recommend, if, again, you don't buy Zonya second, that you buy it last. Banshee, you can buy second in the same slot here, or you can buy it fifth. The thing with Banshee is that Magic Resist can be good. It's kind of the opposite of Zonya. Like, the Magic Resist on Banshee is quite good, but the shield itself is pretty worthless, whereas for Zonya it's the other way around, right? Like, the armor is kind of whatever, but the active is what makes it really good. So Banshee is best bought when you're playing against a composition that's really, really heavy on AP, and you just want to counter them building flat pen, or they don't have percent magic pen or whatever. So again, a very situational item. You're not going to buy it very often. Medjai's is a pretty good item. Now, the thing is, Dark Seal itself is such a good item that most of the time you don't need to upgrade it into Medjai's unless you, I don't know, you're really, really fed. I would generally not go Medjai unless you're already, like, tanky in some way. So this could be from all your health from masks. It could be from having a Zonya or something. Basically, just don't go Medjai if you think there's a chance of losing it, because unlike Dark Seal, Medjai is very inefficient once you lose your stack. So it's very high risk, very high reward. You can offset some of that risk by, again, being tanky or being really ahead, but just be very careful. Now, I did mention Storm Surge briefly, so generally the way to choose between Storm Surge and Shadow Flame second is if you can buy the Rod of Shadow Flame. So Shadow Flame builds out of Alternator and Rod, and what basically you don't want to do is, like, if, for example, you recall and you go, like, double Amtome or you buy Alternator. Now, on your next base, if you have anything less than 1200 gold, you can't buy anything, right? Like, you can't buy the Rod for Shadow Flame. So that leaves you in a really awkward position. So let's say, again, you buy Alternator, and your next base you recall with, say, I don't know, 1000 gold. You actually kind of have to just go Storm Surge. You have to buy, you know, a Storm Surge component, because you don't want to walk out of base with 1k gold. So what I normally do is, if I have enough gold to buy a Rod, I'll buy Shadow Flame. If you don't, you can buy double Amtome, and then you can either go Storm Surge or you could go something like Lichbane. Personally, I'm not a huge Storm Surge fan, so most of the time, if I can't buy the Rod for Shadow Flame, I would instead prefer to build something like Lichbane instead, but that's kind of up to you. We did talk about Lichbane a lot already, but Lichbane is pretty good at all stages of the game, so you'll typically buy either first, second, or last. It can be very good as a last item, even if you didn't buy it early, just because, you know, once you get a lot of AP, the AP ratio on it is doing really well. And finally, the healing reduction. I think you should buy this extremely rarely on Diana. The thing is, like, healing reduction is much better on champs that can easily apply it in AoE, which is not that easy for Diana. Like, you don't have any dots, and it can be difficult sometimes to hit the entire enemy team. So, I don't know, you could buy it if your team really needs it. You should probably just buy the Oblivion Orb and not upgrade it to Morello, but you could. It really should be a last resort. Like, only do it if they have tons and tons of healing. Moving over to our runes, there's a couple pages you can think about, but honestly, you can run this standard page every single game, and you can't really go wrong with it. So we'll start off by taking Phase Rush. Phase Rush is extremely good on Diana. It's really good in the lane because you can easily go for quick trades with like an EWQ, or obviously starting with Q and then into E and W. You can take the quick trade, and you can use that movement speed to either lengthen the trade if you're winning, or you can easily run away before you take any damage in return, and any damage that they do deal will probably go into your shield before it expires. So this is extremely good. Again, later in the game, Phase Rush allows you to do a lot in the team fights and skirmishes that you would be unable to do with Electrocute, and we'll show this in the team fighting section at the end. It's extremely powerful. Mana Flow is pretty nice as well, so Diana doesn't build any mana items ever, so you might struggle a little bit if you don't have any Mana Flow at all. You can make it work, but it's nice to have that little bit of extra mana. Transcendence, you can go Absolute Focus here if you want, but I found that Transcendence is a little better. It's quite nice if you're trying to buy time for your cooldowns to come back or something in team fights. You get those cooldowns back a little quicker. Plus, you get the refund if you're getting takedowns and stuff, which feels kind of nice. And then Scorch, most of the time you do want to go Scorch just because it's quite easy to apply on Dyna, and you do have a lot of lane pressure, so I would recommend going for it. Again, this could be Gathering if you really wanted to, but I don't think it synergizes that well with Dyna, so I would just go for that. Then for your secondary runes, you will almost always go Shield Bash and Bone Plating. So Shield Bash is really good, very easy to proc, it's going to make your trading a lot more powerful. Bone Plating is one that might surprise you, so most of the time when you're playing melee champs, you tend to go Second Wind, especially if you're playing against range, but on Diana, you're going to go Bone Plating into ranged or melee. The reason for this is because Bone Plating, if you can trade with it aggressively the moment it comes up, before the ranged champ procs it, it can still be really powerful. So since Diana has the ability to easily force trades, again, just by starting with E, right? Like you can EWQ, or again, you can fish for a Q, and then go in with your E after. This allows you to trade the moment it comes up, and if your opponent tries to trade back into you when you've got your Bone Plating, you're pretty much always going to win. So if this doesn't make sense for you now, it'll make a bit more sense after the laning phase section of this video, but just look out for it. I'd say it's better than Second Wind most of the time. Then for your shards, just go double adaptive and scaling HP. You don't really need attack speed on this champ since you're going to get so much attack speed from your passive. You can go flat HP here if you want. It's basically whatever. So use this page in 99% of games. Now, if you want to play Ignite, or you want to just like burst your opponents as much as possible, you can go Electrocute. Personally, I don't think this page is as good for several reasons. One, I don't think Ignite is a very good sum. I think it's much better just to play TP, and that's going to give you much more pressure in the mid game. But again, you can do it. The other thing I don't like about this build is that it kind of limits your options a little more. You need to snowball a lot harder, and you're going to take a lot more damage in any scenario, right? Whether that's trading or team fighting, whatever. Now, that can be worth it sometimes. So an example of when this might be good would be into a champ that you can't really run away from. So, for example, let's imagine you're playing against something like Lissandra. You might want to take Electrocute because, you know, if you dash onto Lissandra and you get CC'd, you're not going to be able to abuse that phase rush movement speed anyway. So there are a couple niche matchups where you can run this, and you can go Sorcery if you're really struggling with the mana. I'd probably go Mana Flow Scourge. But realistically, if you're running this page, you have to win your lane as hard as possible. So you kind of do need to take a Resolve secondary, at least in my opinion. So that's another reason I don't like this, is again the lack of mana. But you can make it work. And then the runes themselves, you have Sudden Impact's just your best option. This one here can be Ghost Power, can be the Mementos one. It can be basically whatever you want. Finally, probably the Relentless Hunter for the movement speed. But yeah, I really recommend playing Phase Rush all the time, and you'll see mostly Phase Rush examples throughout this video. I think it is much, much better. But again, this is an option if you want to play for it. Lastly, before we move any further, I want to briefly mention some of the matchups. Now, at the end of this video, there will be a matchup tier list, so you can refer to that. But let's just briefly talk about what you're good against and what you're bad against. So Dinah is really, really good against immobile mages, especially ones that don't have CC, so things like Orianna. It's very easy to set up ganks onto them. It's very easy to dash on them and trade on them at basically any stage, especially, again, if they don't have CC to stop you from just immediately dashing on them. So it's really, really good into anything like that. Most mages are going to be winning for Diana. It's also really good against any sort of assassin, especially ones that are very reliant on burst, because you can easily play mask builds into these sort of champions and just be really, really hard to deal with. Like, you stat check them at basically every stage of the game. You'll have a very good side lane into them. If they do roam, you're really, really good at taking their tower. Like, you've got so much extra damage from your passive that you're going to be able to take their plates very easily. So Dinah is also quite good against most assassins. She is still good against assassins like LeBlanc, although I just wanted to put this one here. You need to be a bit more careful. So in the 1v1, Dinah is very good against a champ like LeBlanc, but gank setup can be kind of annoying. Dinah is relatively gankable. Like, she has a lot of mobility in terms of going in, but she doesn't have a lot of mobility in terms of going out. So I would still pick Dinah into LeBlanc, but just be a little more careful if you play into those sort of assassins. Now, for what it's bad against, I will say that I don't think Diana has many bad matchups. For the most part, in mid at least, it's going to be winning. There's a few things, though, that can be kind of hard. So the first one is Akali. So champions that are just, like, very good against other melees, again, things like Akali, or you can even think of, like, other random top laners, things like Aurelia or Renekton or something. Like, anything that is kind of like a anti-melee bully is going to be kind of tough for you. Akali is particularly bad, especially early, just because the trades are so hard to deal with. That being said, you actually scale really well into Akali, right? Like, eventually she just won't have the damage to kill you, but just kind of realize that that's going to be quite tough early. Second, we have Lysandra. So this, again, is kind of thinking a bit more about, like, those things that we already said Diana struggles with. So Lysandra's got a lot of gank set up, and you can't do that well into her with the phase rush. Now, I will say that, again, you can actually win this matchup 1v1. Like, if you take the full early game setup here, you even go for, like, Ignite, you actually can kill Lysandra, but you do have to be very careful. Like, one mistake will just mean you die to the jungler, and then you'll be useless for the rest of the game. It is very much a high-risk matchup, and generally something I would avoid. Finally, yeah, Saz, again, just more of a stat check champion. So these champions that are quite good in the extended trades, but are too tanky for you to burst. So again, things like Sylas or even Yasuo or Aurelia, those can generally be kind of hard. But again, there are not that many of these champions that you would run into that you think are going to be super tough. You can definitely blind her, and even these matchups can be made to work. It's more just if you see one of these blind, probably you would look to pick something else, but again, you can make it work. So try and stay away from stat check champions or champs with very high CC. Otherwise, you're enough of a stat check champion that you will probably beat just about everything else. You'll beat the majority of the mid lane roster, with them being mobile mages or assassins. Before I go any further, I just want to let you guys know that there is an extended version of this guide available in the Mid Lane Academy that I made alongside Coach Mysterious if you want. It's mostly what we talked about in this video, but complete with even more examples and talked about even more in depth and some of the more niche scenarios and stuff like that. In addition, if you haven't heard of the Mid Lane Academy before, there's a whole bunch of other things on here. So there's a bunch of resources for every single champion in the game. There's a full section on fundamentals. There's daily coaching sessions run by a variety of coaches every day. So if you're really looking to improve and, you know, take your climb seriously, all that sort of stuff, there will be a link to that in the description below. Now, I'm just going to go through and briefly explain Diana's abilities so that you have an idea of what to expect. First off, we have Diana's passive. So Diana passively gains some attack speed. It is tripled, however, for 5 seconds after using an ability. So this is going to be very, very important for when you're pushing the side lane, or you're trying to hit turrets that are exposed, or you're trying to grab plates when your opponent roams off tempo. Basically, you won't need to think about this most of the time, but again, if you're hitting a turret, just make sure to space out your abilities. Same thing if you're hitting an objective, just space out your abilities so that you always have the buff. So if you can see, if I use an ability, you've got this thing down here that shows you have additional attack speed. You'll probably feel it just when you're autoing because it is quite a lot of attack speed. In addition, every third attack cleaves nearby enemies for additional damage. Now, the AoE on this is pretty small. You're not expecting to, like, AoE the whole team or something. You can see here that I can't reach the Scuttle Crab with it. But that's quite useful for, again, if you're like clearing a jungle camp or something, like especially in the side lane. It does also apply to turrets, so it makes you kill the turret even faster. It can be kind of useful for wave clearing as well. So again, not something you'll have to think about a ton. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in the combos guide, how you might use it in trading and stuff. Next, we have Diana's Q. Kind of a weird ability. It's a crescent shape, as you can see like this, which is actually like really easy to hit and quite hard to dodge. So it's an ability that you can use pretty often. It also marks them with Moonlight. So Moonlight is what's going to interact with your E. We'll get to that in a little bit. Basically, all you need to know is just an ability that, you know, does solid damage, very spammable. You can see the cooldown's quite short, the mana is quite low, which is pretty nice as well. And it also reveals enemies, so that means that like if they continue into the fog of war, you can still see them for a little bit while it's on them. Next, we have Diana's W. So this creates a little shield for yourself that also does damage, and it's got kind of two parts of it, I guess. So you'll see here that it does damage here, and you also gain a shield. When the last sphere detonates, you gain an additional shield and refreshes the duration. So if I press W here, right, you can see the shield duration down here. Now, if I hit this Scuttle Crab, you'll see when that final orb hits it, I get the shield back, and again, refreshes the duration of it. So this is going to be really, really useful for avoiding damage in lane. You're going to use it to avoid harass, but it's also quite useful for when you go into trade. Like a lot of the time, you'll press W before you dash in to make sure that your W pops immediately, and you get that refresh shield. So again, we'll get to that when we talk about trading. Diana's E, point and click dash ability with a lot of range. People really underestimate how long the range is. And if your target is affected with Moonlight, so essentially if you have hit a target with your Q, you can refresh your E immediately. So you'll see here, like if I Q this, my E cooldown is immediately refreshed, which is really, really important because you'll see here that the cooldown on this ability is very, very long, and Diana doesn't really build a lot of haste. So this ability is going to remain long for most of the game, especially because you max this ability last. So that's very, very key that you're kind of aware that you can reset it. We'll talk more about combos with that later. And finally, we have Diana's ult, which is a small AoE around her, which pulls enemies in, slows them, and deals damage. Now, the damage is increased based on how many champions you pull. So you kind of see, pulls them next to you like this. And again, the more champions you get, the more damage it does. In fact, even if they're not hit by it, right? Like, so even if champions get out of it, the damage is calculated based on when you pull them in, not actually who it hits. So like, let's say, for example, we've got like 3 people around us. Even if we were to press R here, and then 2 of these people dash out, the last person is still going to take the increased damage. That's just something small to be aware of. Now, as for which abilities to max, you're going to max Q, then W, then E, and put a point in Alt whenever you're able to. As for which abilities to skill early, it's almost always going to be, you know, Q level 1, W level 2, and then E level 3. Sometimes you can go E level 2 if you want to dash on your opponent and you think they just can't trade on you, but you're missing so much extra trading power by not having W that generally it's not worth it. And again, sometimes you might start W in order to avoid damage, but most of the time you'll avoid more damage by putting a point in Q anyway and just farming from range. So it's pretty simple. You really don't need to overcomplicate it. Just keep it simple. You know, start Q, start W, then E. Put points in the same order, and again, make sure to put a point in Alt whenever you can. Okay, so now I want to talk more about the combos and how you're actually going to use the abilities and stuff to trade. So let's talk about your laning phase first. Pretty simple. Something you're going to look to do is you're going to look to spam out your Q pretty much on cooldown. Obviously, if you can poke your opponent with this, it's really good. Like when they come up for a CS or something, you know, let's say they're trying to last hit a creep, that's a great time to just hit them with a Q. Now, in your first couple of levels, like level 1 and 2, you might just want to use this to farm. Again, you'll see this in the laning section, but it's really important to stay healthy because level 3 is when you're going to really, really start to trade. Now, once you get to level 2, you're going to put a point in W most of the time. The way you're going to use this is, again, just to avoid taking damage. So it's pretty common for you to kind of like be playing back here, using W to walk up and grab the creeps, you know, make sure to get the full proc so that you can get the shield again. And you'll just be using that in order to avoid damage for the most part. Now, level 3 is when things start to get interesting. This is when you're going to start looking to heavy trade, and there's a couple different things that you can do at this point. So when you trade, you have a lot of different abilities to keep track of. Obviously, you've got QW and E. You've also got Phase Rush and Bone Plating. So these are a lot of different abilities or a lot of different effects that can make your trades a lot stronger. So your typical trade would be to, again, hit Q on your opponent and then look to dash in on them. Now, when you dash in, you actually want to press W before E most of the time. That way you can get the proc off immediately. You can essentially press them at the same time. Like if you do this and then you press E and W at the same time, they should mostly go off. So you probably don't need to worry about it too much, but it is ideal if you can trade with everything up, because you want to just like be able to stat check your opponent and just destroy them as hard as possible. Normally, if you QE in without having W, it'll be pretty rough. Obviously, you can trade without Q, and I'll talk about that in a sec, but it's going to be a little more difficult. Now, the next thing is when you do this trade, you want to think a lot about what you want to do with your phase rush. So one thing that's like really powerful is to go in and trade and then just like run away before you take really any damage in return. So you might do something like this and then just run away as your shield is expiring, and that's going to prevent you from really taking any damage, which is really, really valuable, because it's not just about like how much damage you do to your opponent, it's also about kind of creating as big a health lead as you can. So avoiding damage is valuable. Now, if you're not really scared about the damage that they're going to return onto you, like let's say that they've already used cooldowns and you're just starting to go in because they don't have anything up, or they're just kind of weak, you can instead kite forward, right? So you can easily use your phase rush movement speed to keep chasing them, right? And like keep autoing as you're going. It's very, very flexible. Now, in addition to Phase Rush, we have Bone Plating. So Bone Plating, when procced, the next 3 spells or attacks you receive basically do a lot less damage to you, which is really, really nice. This can reduce a lot of additional damage. So if possible, you want to trade the moment Bone Plating comes up. Now, you don't necessarily have to have Bone Plating to trade, but you really don't want to let Bone Plating get proc for free. And again, you'll see this in the laning section. It'll probably make a little more sense. And there's a couple ways to do this. So sometimes your opponent might be spacing you, and you might not be able to hit a Q onto them. Now that's fine, because you actually will see that E is pretty long range as well, and as much, they won't be expecting it so much. So let's say, for example, that your opponent came up to CS. What you can do is you can EWQ and proc your phase rush and run away. So even though this won't reset your E, right, you'll see here, you can still do this and run away. And a lot of the time that will be better. You can still guarantee your Q because you'll get it on them in melee. And you'll manage to get all your damage, and as long as you have, again, Bone Plating or Phase Rush or something, you should be able to win this trade. Now, you might be wondering, okay, in that initial trade, well, with the Q trade right here, what do you want to do with your second E? Well, you have options. Once again, you can continue to chase them, or you can E out. Like, imagine that's a creep. You can E away. So again, that gives you more options, but it's just unlikely, because most of the time, honestly, like, people will not let you hit a Q like this, or if they do, they're probably going to back up out of E range. So you'll find that a lot of trades are going to start just by using EWQ. So that's mostly how your trades are going to go in lane. Now, one additional thing I'll add is that, especially later in the lane, when you're a little bit stronger, it is okay to Q the backline and then look to jump onto your opponent off of that. So like, let's say, for example, that we're laning here, and let's say our opponent is safely playing back here. What we might want to do is Q through the wave like this, and then we can E to the backline. Then we could either EW onto our opponent, right? So we could easily go for something like, you know, an EWQ onto them. Or if they're close at the wave, we might be able to pull them in. So just realize that, again, especially as you get a bit later in the lane and you're maybe not so reliant on, you know, poking your opponent down, you know, maybe your base stats are getting a bit higher, maybe you've got a few more items, it is okay to simply use E for the gap close. Now, one other little thing I'll actually add here, and I can't really show this well in practice tool, is that your E still resets even if you don't get onto your opponent. So I know that sounds kind of weird, but like, let's say this is a Syndra. If you do this and you E towards them and they E you in midair, your E will still reset. And I'll show an example of that again later in the video, but that can be really nice because a lot of people will think that your E is actually down, and then you can just E onto them again immediately. So that's mostly what you're going to do in the laning phase. Now, your abilities in team fights are actually pretty straightforward as well. So most of the time, again, you'll simply be poking with Q. You're going to look for opportunities to go in with E or W. The best advice I can give for team fights would be to like, not go in too early, you know, like, make sure you wait your moments, and again, well, I'll show this later in the video, but make sure you wait for cooldowns and stuff to be used before you can go in. A couple additional tips is that a lot of times in teamfights, you will want to start with just E. So obviously, there will be times where, let's say we want to go in like this and we want to use our E and have E available so that when we kite away, we can easily get back in, like maybe they group up and then we can E and ult them or something. But just as well, you know, if you notice an enemy squishy out of position, just start with E, right? Like, just dash them immediately, pull them in with ult, and that'll be really valuable. Couple other things you might need to know. We talked about this previously, but Q does reveal targets. So there's a person in this bush. You can see them with your Q as long as you hit them. So that can be quite nice. Like if you're trying to face check an area or something, it might be good to check some of the bushes that you go into beforehand, just to make sure you don't die. Another thing is that you can R flash. So let's say, for example, there's like a few people here, and then there's like one dude there. You can quickly R flash, which can be kind of useful. You'll sometimes catch people off guard. You can sort of do the same thing with Protobell, although most of the time with Protobell, if you are running this, you'll actually use it to move your ult after. So like what you might do, for example, is you might proc phase rush, and actually, yeah, you can do this with just phase rush. Like if, for example, you proc phase rush here, you might use that movement speed to run at them with your ult. Now, bear in mind, again, the damage is based off not how many people you hit, but how many people you pull. So if you're like running a one-person ultimate worth of damage into the enemy team, that might be worth it. Or, sorry, it might not be worth it. But at the same time, you can easily, you know, drag a many-person ultimate onto one important target, which can be really nice. Like, I don't know, if you need to kill an AD carry or someone who's particularly valuable. So overall, like, Diana doesn't have like any super important, you know, tips or tricks. I guess like one other thing that I might quickly add is that when you are trading or looking to go in, if you can stack your passive beforehand, that's pretty useful. So like, let's say again that we want to, I don't know, we want to EWQ on this guy, right? The moment we hit level 3 or when our bone putting comes up or something. What you might want to do is quickly stack 2 autos, just so you get a little bit of extra damage when you go in. It's not the end of the world, honestly, and if you see the opportunity to trade, I would just go. But that is like something, you know, it does add up, right? Like you should try and do it if you can. And I guess like last other things that I will mention is you do camps very, very quickly. So since Diana is like balanced to be a jungler, she does bonus damage to monsters, which means that even when you don't have a whole lot of items, it's very easy for you to do camps. So like if you're playing the side lane and whatever, make sure you look for these little opportunities to do camps. And again, make sure you space out your abilities to maximize your attack speed, because what you don't want is to lose your attack speed buff and then be unable to kill the camp. And I've talked about it previously, but this does also apply to turrets. Like if you're sieging this turret, let's just clear all this out. What you might want to do is to just like spread out your abilities. Same thing if you're playing Lich Bane, just to maximize the proc. So you can kind of see here that if we walk up to this turret, we start with here, and then we're just like watching this attack speed buff down here. When this is almost running out, that's when we might use a W. Then again, we get more attack speed. Wait for that to go low, Q again, you know, get more attack speed, etc. And that's going to enable you to take turrets really fast. So I think that's it for the combo section, honestly. I don't think there's really too much to it. It's a relatively easy champion to combo on, but as long as you remember most of the laning tips, that'll be the most important. Now for our laning examples. So I'm going to show a few different laning phases, just the different sort of champions and stuff you can play against as Diana, and kind of, you know, what you need to be aware of, just kind of showing a bit more of the combos and stuff that we'll be using. So first things first in the laning phase, mostly again, you'll want to be just using your Q when your opponent goes to last hit. Obviously prioritize your own last hits. Like if you can't do both, you know, try and get your own last hit. But if you can, you know, getting a Q when your opponent comes up to CS is quite nice. Another thing that's quite important is, if possible, try and keep the wave on your side whenever you can. So in this case, the wave started by pushing early because the Twitch came mid-level 1, so I need to make sure that I get this wave under the turret so that it comes back out into the middle. This is very, very important because you're going to need some sort of distance in order to chase your opponent down, so when they're on their side under the turret, lies very difficult. So you can see there by crashing, we get the wave to come back out. And now we're going to start just looking to fish for harass. So if she comes up for the CS, we can Q her. It's really good as well if you can manage to, you know, farm while you're doing that. Although mostly you'd want to prioritize the damage if you're going to use Q. But again, like prioritize your CS above all else. Like if you had to choose one or the other, you know, make sure to just go for the CS first. Now that we're level 3, right, this is where we really come online. We also have bone plating, so we're very, very incentivized to trade. I know that because these CS are low, that she's going to try and, like, come up for them, right? So you can see me trying to fish for the Q, also trying to hit the wave at the same time. Now, if you wanted, you probably could, if you had W, just go for a straight EW auto here. But you can see that, like, because I used W just before, I'm instead trying to play safe. Also notice that I'm really making sure that I don't lose my bone plating randomly, right? So for those of you that didn't know, you can track your bone plating down here, but it only shows when it's on cooldown. So this will disappear once it's up. once it does come up, be very careful again to try not to lose it randomly, because you want to be able to just like force a trade with it. So you can see right here again, looking for the Q and she comes up to the CS. I dash onto her with everything available, and I actually take no damage whatsoever. So you can see in that situation, I tried to kite forward and try and use my phase rush movement speed because I was so strong. I was so convinced that I could just win the trade. And you'll notice that my shield actually absorbed enough damage that my bone plating didn't even drop. So that's one thing to kind of be aware of as well, is that bone plating only procs if it's damage dealt not to a shield. So I'm pretty sure in the moment I didn't actually even notice that. But that is something kind of important, you know, because again, you might be able to force trades in the future having that available. So if we just skim through a bit, she goes for the reset, so do I. I go spend all my money. Now, this is something you're looking for. So because we forced her to reset first, right? So our better laning forced her to reset first. Now we have an item advantage, right? Like, just take a look at the items. She has 400 gold spent. I have a lot more, and more importantly, I have sustain. So the trades are going to be really good for us right now, because even if we were to do even damage, with us having more sustain, it's going to be really winning. And you'll see here that so much damage is absorbed by bone plating in our shield that the trade ends up like really favorable, again, especially, you know, compounded even further by having sustain. Now pre-6, again, it can be very good to freeze the waves. So I come here and freeze. Post 6 and maybe like post 8 minutes or so, freezing is not as good because, you know, at that point there's things like grubs and dragons, and maybe you can roam and deep ward or whatever. But generally early in the game, freezing is quite nice because, you know, you can look to set up ganks. It's easy to chase your opponent down. You might need to be a little careful, you know, like you might not want to freeze at, say, 3:30 when the Scuttle Crab is spawning, but this is really good because it forces LeBlanc to come up far in the wave in order to CS. Now, I didn't go there immediately because I didn't have Phase Rush up and I wanted to wait for it. And you'll notice here that now my Phase Rush is up. Even though I missed my Q, I look for the trade, right? I still want to try and force my trades because I know that I'm going to win them. I know that I have more sustain. And we're starting to pull ahead to a really nice lead, right? We're 35 CS or something to 19, which is really good. And once again, we just like keep forcing trades, and eventually we kill her here. So I'll just rewind this a bit so you guys can see. So bone plating's coming up, right? Big incentive to trade. Phase rush also coming up. On top of that, we have, you know, a huge health advantage. We have item advantage. You know, we're just stronger for so many different reasons. So we trade on her, and we're able to pick up a kill. So that's really nice. It allows us to start snowballing. So I'll just show a little more of this lane, but I think by this point, you kind of get the idea. You'll just do the same thing. So you're really strong. You can just look to stat check your opponent, which is exactly what I again do here. So level 5 versus level 6. I quickly just run at her, and you can see how little damage I take in return, right? Like the trade ends up very one-sided. And that, you know, again, allows you to or look to force your opponent off the turret or something, right? You can see here that if the wave isn't frozen, potentially you can look to harass on the turret. I can't remember if I mentioned it, but if you do want to find the full VOD, if you go to my YouTube and you go to the live section, you'll be able to find the VOD somewhere early in the, I think it's day 1 actually of the Unranked Master Challenge on Melees. So we can go to another VOD. I just want to show one more thing here. So when you manage to chunk out your opponent or you get them low or whatever, you want to be able to hit the turret if you can. Now, if you need to base, I wouldn't recommend doing this. Like, most of the time, you should shove a wave and then reset. But if you have TP available to where you can instantly reset, or you have a lot of HP and mana left over to where you don't need to reset, it can be worth staying and trying to get some damage on the turret. Basically, the only reason you don't want to do this is you don't want to end up stuck in lane having missed your base, you know? So like I'm able to do this because I still have a lot of resources. But again, like if you were low HP there, probably just shove and then go for the reset. So yeah, let's go over to another laning example, but that's a pretty good idea of what you're looking to do in lane. The second game here is Diana versus Syndra, which I think is another kind of interesting matchup because this is something where they do have a CC to where it's not as easy to just immediately dash onto them. So when you're playing against these sort of champions, you kind of need to bait out their CC or kind of choose your moments a little more carefully. So there's a few things kind of to look at straight away. First off, the Syndra has first strike, which means that she's a lot weaker early. So if you're ever playing against an opponent that has greedy runes, whether that's things like Phase Rush or First Strike or whatever, you're going to win the trades even harder, as opposed to champs that might have Electrocute or Comet or Airy or whatever. Essentially, combat keystones are a lot. They're not even like necessarily harder to play against, but you won't be able to stomp them quite so much. Whereas like when you see something like this, the scaling rune, like you can really destroy these champions. So let's take a look at the laning phase itself. First off, level 1. Again, need to be quite careful. I'm just mostly going to focus on queuing from range. Now, very important, again, we want this wave to be on our side, right? So you don't want to accidentally queue the wave too much. Because if you queue the wave too much, right, see if I'd like gone through there, right, instead of around, what's going to happen is you end up pushing the wave away from you, which is not what you want, especially into range matchups. If you're against a melee that you can bully, it's kind of okay, and we'll see that a bit later. But again, like versus this, I'm very, very, what's the word? Very concerned. I guess I want to make sure that I get this wave pushing to me. So I'm trying not to splash the wave too much, just making sure to thin it out and farm from range. Now I take W level 2. I don't feel like that I can E directly onto Syndra, so I'm mostly just going to use these in order to avoid taking damage. You can see there, you can walk up, absorb some of the auto damage, clear out that creep, and now we're starting to get into a really, really good position. So the wave is on our side. We're going to be hitting level 3 soon, which is going to mean that we're going to be able to chase down the Syndra. So still trying to avoid damage whenever possible. If I can keep my bone plating, that's good, but it's not always possible, right? Like if she plays well, she'll probably get rid of it. But this is starting to look really good. Like my bone plating is up. I'm level 3. Kind of see here how I'm positioning to the next to the creeps that she wants to CS, because this is very threatening. Like she feels very scared, and see how that forces her to use abilities, because she feels like, oh, if I walk up, like she's just going to get traded off, which is true. So your positioning can force your opponent to waste cooldowns. And when your opponent wastes cooldowns, that's an opportunity for you to look to dash onto her. So once again, pull the wave, try and keep it in a gankable position, and I'm going to start looking for a trade here. So whenever she comes into range, I'm going to be fishing with Q. I can't actually remember if I decide to open with E instead. I think I am looking for the Q, mainly because I felt like she was just going to instantly knock me back. Now, that's very important. So once again, this is a master tier syndrome. As if you're playing against lower elo players, they'll probably just use their stuns and stuff like more freely, and you might get free windows to go on them. But here we kind of need to force this cooldown out of our opponent. And the way we do it is, again, stand next to the creeps they want to farm. To make them feel like, oh, like if I don't use this ability to farm, I'm going to take damage. But if they do, that's like a great window to trade. And in fact, now that we know Syndra's E is down for 17 seconds, on this cannon, that's like our next window, right? We're like waiting for her to come up to it. Now, I did use W here, which I think might have been a mistake. So I used it because I felt like I was going to miss the creep. But the downside of using that is it makes it harder for me to instantly E onto her. So you could argue it was a mistake. I think it was, but you can kind of see what I'm going for, right? Again, like looking for opportunities to harass whenever possible, looking to, again, position next to the creeps to bait out the cooldowns. She uses stun again, which is quite good for me. Now that her stun is down, I go for that quick EWQ trade and take some damage onto her for free, which is really nice. So we start to build up a bigger and bigger health lead. I can kind of spare you here for a little bit. There's not anything too big other than I continue to poke her out. And we'll just scam, I think, until post 6. Once again, the VOD is fully available if you want to go look for it. Okay, so eventually, like, we poke her out of lane, right? From constantly, looking to deny her CS, constantly looking for Q-poke, we force her into our base, and now we have a big item advantage. So we're up a few hundred gold, which means that the trades are overall going to be winning. So, here, right, she's coming up for these creeps. She's just used her Q. Now, one thing to be kind of aware of is that as you get later in the lane, the ability that matters most changes for the opponent. So in this case, Syndra has 3 points Q, right? Which means it's kind of a more important ability right now because a greater proportion of her damage is in Q. So what that means is when that's down, I can just instantly dash onto her. Now, funnily enough, I actually think I misplayed this a little bit, but it's still a really good trade, right? You can see how one-sided it is. If you're curious as to how I misplayed it, I think it's probably better here to actually save this E and just run at her and E her after to stay on her. So rather than Eing on her immediately, just walk at her, save it a little bit, and then you can use it again after. So it's a very, small misplay, and it kind of worked out. But yeah, again, that's something you can be careful of, just like don't use it too early. Also, yeah, again, don't be afraid using your ult just for poke. So obviously it's, better if you can get a kill or whatever with it. But if you can get a really good trade, like if that's going to allow you to get a bunch of extra autos and an extra Q, then obviously that's really worth it. Now, Syndra, I think, yeah, she went into the river, so I managed to take a quick plate from her, which is nice. Once again, she's getting pretty low, doing the same thing again, abusing our health advantage, trying to position aggressively on the wave, so it's very difficult for her to walk up, which you can see. I'm always fishing for the poke, and I think eventually here, we're going to pick up a kill. Can't remember quite when it is. Oh yeah, here's that little interaction I wanted to show you guys. You'll see here that I try and E onto her. She cancels it, but I still get the refund, which she didn't expect. So I'm pretty sure right here she thought my E was on cooldown, which is why she's like walking up a little more. But then we're immediately able to get on her and burn her flash, which is super nice. And later on, I think, yeah, it's right here. We're able to just abuse that flash advantage to immediately go on her and get the kill. So that's going to be super, super valuable. You can kind of see it's like mostly the same thing, right? You just continue to abuse your stat advantages. You're looking for opportunities to trade, so on and so forth. Now this matchup here is one I played against Akali. So this is one of the most difficult Diana matchups and not one that you're going to be able to win early. Now you can go for something like Grasp in this matchup if you want. Honestly, I think I would still take Phase Rush. I was just experimenting at the time, but I think I'd just go Phase Rush. So in these sort of matchups, it's very, very important to avoid trades, right? You can see that I start W. I make sure to play far back in the lane. I want to avoid taking damage whenever possible. You're going to need to be very, very picky about the windows you decide to engage on your opponent, because for the most part, the trades are going to be losing. So this wave comes all the way in. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to freeze it off the turret. Sometimes you might be able to, like if your opponent disrespects, they let you crash it, but it's kind of like, you're hoping they're making a mistake, and a lot of the time they won't. So yeah, you can kind of see I'm just playing back. Not really anything to it. Once again, just trying to get to level 3. Now, once I get level 3, I decided to go for a quick trade here. So I missed my Q, but I was able to just go in, quickly proc my stuff, get out. This is kind of nice. This is pretty niche, but sometimes you can E behind, people's poke or whatever. This can be especially useful against skill shot mages, especially ones with circle skill shots like Syndra. You can oftentimes get onto them and avoid taking damage. Him through a little more. Yeah, I get ganked by Twitch. Classic. Don't think there's like too much here. I think I end up... Oh, I don't end up dying. Can't quite remember, but overall the main point is that, again, in these sort of matchups you just need to play it quite safe. The thing is that in these matchups later on you'll get tanky and then it'll be difficult for them to kill you. So you see here I go for a ruby, and I think eventually this becomes a mask, and what you'll find is that if they can't burst you down, at some point these champs will run out of damage. Now even in these bad matchups you might have small windows where you can trade. So like right here I got level 5, I have that small little advantage. I'm able to quickly take the trade and back away. You want to be kind of careful, again, doing this, because you need to choose those windows very, very carefully. But potentially, if you do enough of that, you can be in a good spot. And again, I don't want to look too much more at it, but I think what you'll probably see here eventually is that I just end up really tanky. Do I have it at the very end? I can't remember. Yeah, so I end up getting the mask, right? And at this point, I'm just so tanky that Akali just can't really trade into me anymore. I don't think I put anything else here because it's not super important. But that's definitely something for you to look out for. As if you play against one of these really difficult matchups, you can focus on farming with Q. Just wait to scale, wait to get your items, and you should be okay. The very last matchup here I want to show is kind of the end of this lane here. So this was Diana versus Ahri, and I was destroying her early, and I kind of want to show you guys how you might snowball the lead. So I was kind of saying before that it's really, really important that you don't miss your base. So like you really want to hit turrets with Diana, but again, sometimes you won't be able to. So let's take this one for example. If I were healthier or if I had TP, I would stay and probably try and take this entire plate. But what happens is because I don't have TP, because I don't have the resources, I need to just base, right? Because I don't want to get stuck in lane with like really low HP and no resources. But you'll see later on, when I do manage to get a kill with healthier resources, how much stuff you can actually take. So let me see if I can find it. It shouldn't be too far. Okay, so here I end up killing Ahri, I think. So I'm level 8 versus level 7. I think she used ult in a skirmish. You can see here I just jumped onto the back line, immediately ulted her into me, chased her down with the phase rush movement speed and the red buff. So that's not too important. Mostly I want to focus on what we do after. So, pause. Big difference here, we have TP. So we can't really get trapped in lane here. We can always base TP after and it'll still be fine. Also, we are kind of like healthy on the resources. Now, you probably still do want to base at some point because we have a lot of gold, but if you got stuck in lane, wouldn't be the end of the world. But you'll see, especially if you have a cannon wave, especially if you have grubs, how much gold you can take after killing someone. So we come up to the turret, we make sure to space out our abilities, right, to maximize the attack speed. And I mean, I'm just destroying her turret. Like, she's dead for 6 more seconds. I've taken so many plates already. I try and make sure to clear out the wave there. So even with her taking TP, or having TP, I was able to take 4 plates, or no, I think 3 plates, sorry. I've already taken 1, away from her, which is a huge amount of gold, right? Like, that is a massive increase, or a massive income swing. And then as I come back to lane, I think I eventually just like kill her again and finish taking the turret, so this is just something really, really important to be aware of. Is a lot of what makes Diana so good at snowballing is finding these windows to hit the turret, because you can accelerate so quickly, but you've got to be so careful, because if you do it at the wrong time, like, you end up overstaying, and you'll ruin your tempo. So you've got to be, again, immensely aware of that. Also, damn, what a turbo banger. So yeah, that should be it for the laning phase. Again, the short form of it is just you're trying to find windows to trade, mainly based off like your phase rush bone plating and also their cooldowns. Other than that, you're mostly just going to be fishing with Q poke, avoiding damage until level 3, keeping the wave on your side, and I guess like post 6, looking for opportunities to hit the turret if they make a mistake. Diana's team fighting isn't too hard, but it takes a little bit of experience, and it's mostly about choosing your moment. So I've got a few different examples I want to show you guys here, kind of, showing off, I guess, some of the more important things to be aware of. So the first one here is playing around phase rush. So if you pause this before it even begins, let's take a look at the map. So the big thing is that Riven is currently top, and she doesn't have TP. So what that means is that she will not be joining this fight. So our goal here is to buy as much time as possible, right? We don't want to fully commit to this fight because it's a 5v4. In theory, what Riven is getting top, as long as we don't die down here, is worth it. Like, she can take this turret. She should really be hitting the turret, not the Gromp right now, but, okay. She's not here, basically, is the main thing, right? So we need to play this very slowly, and you'll see a lot of this fight is about using phase rush to go in and out in order to not fully commit. So I'm playing on the edge, right? I'm poking with Q, I go in, I proc the phase rush, and then I just run away, right? I'm able to just like kite away. Now, it might have been better just to hold alt there and not use it this early, but again, we're just trying to buy time, so it's not the end of the world. Once again, playing at the edge of the fight, paying attention to my phase rush cooldown here, right? You don't want to go in too early without a way to get out. So the fight ends up split, and it's okay for me to go in because there's no one here. And then I'm able to just go out with my phase rush and then just run away. Because at this point, there's obviously not much of a fight left to have. And Riven is getting stuff top. So this is really, really good. A good example of like how to use your phase rush. You don't necessarily need to fully commit early. You just need to play kind of slowly. Now, next I want to show an example of how you might engage. So here, there's a Lee Sin over here in the fog who's guarding the flank. It's a little difficult for me to go for this, but I'm trying to find some sort of engage on their backline. They have a very fed AD carry from what I remember, the Xayah, but I can't just go on her immediately, right? Because she has R, and she also has plenty of people that can immediately go onto me, even though I have Zhonya. So you'll see here, pay attention to me. I'm kind of moving back and forth. I'm waiting for them to use cooldowns. I'm trying to like wait for my moment. Now I hit Q on this Mord, right? And I'm actually able to proc my phase rush on him. I probably should have ate him, but, anyway, I proc my phase rush, and then we can use that movement speed just to get into regular E range, pop my R, again, use the movement speed to drag it onto 3 people, and then I can just easily Zhonya here before I get E'd by Xayah. So again, just kind of the main thing to realize is, I think a lot of Dianas just like run in immediately, like they see 3 people group, they just like flash ER. This can work, especially if you do have Zhonya, but, if they have lots of cooldowns and stuff available, you probably don't want to, and you might not need to either. Like, you can wait for a better opportunity, right? Bard Q down, Bard alt down. A lot of these cooldowns like Lee's use W, so he can't shield the Xayah anymore. And then suddenly, I'm in the backline with them not having anything. That's a good example of like how you might want to engage. Another example of this, kind of choosing your moments. So in this sort of situation, we're actually losing, right? Like the enemy team's a little stronger than us, so we've got to be very, very careful how we engage. But we do have phase rush up. So you'll see here what I do. I initially kite away because I get Nautilus ulted, right? Diana is too squishy to sit in the middle of the enemy team and just tank all the damage. So I kite away. What I do now is I quickly go in, proc my phase rush, and once again, just kite away. I'm able to kite away. That forces, if you go back and look, Kindred jumps away from me because she's scared of me, right? Immediately jumps away. Now, I just go back and kill Nautilus. So the fight got split. I can once again wait for my cooldowns to come back up. And then it's really easy here to just go on these guys once they're, no longer protected. They don't have like their giant front line in front of them anymore. So again, just like make sure to play patient. You don't always have to rush the team fight. This one here is kind of an example of just why, I talked about this in the item section, why you might just need Zhonya in your final build. So late in the game, even if you have a lot of health, you are just kind of squishy. You can easily be CC'd. So in this sort of fight here, my Zhonya buys enough time for me to get another round of cooldowns off. So just take a look at this. So first off, playing over the wall, right? I don't want to be the first one to go in. I'm waiting for them to use cooldowns. I'm waiting for them to overextend. Now, I did try an E on Zed here, but he was just barely out of range. Couldn't quite get onto him, but I'm able to get on him here. Now, I immediately altered the Janna just to try and kill her. Maybe you could hold the E here if you wanted, but I think it was good to use. Just cancel the die and I'll put it on cooldown. And you'll see, though, that all my cooldowns are very far away. So, like, just pause right now. You probably won't be able to, like, notice this by looking at it in the moment, but you'll feel it, right? So, no phase rush, no bone plating, no QWER. Like, I have no abilities, right? So, this is really good to just Zhonya, wait for your Transcendence. Like, if you notice here, the Transcendence is proccing on the takedowns, helping refresh my cooldowns. And that's going to mean that when I come out of Zhonya, that they're basically all back up, and then we can immediately just go back to fighting. So, you don't necessarily need to have Zhonya early, but in your 6th item, full build or whatever, you're going to need a Zhonya for situations like that. Otherwise, you're just going to explode too fast. Wanted to show this one here because this is a really, really good example of basically a perfect fight. So this one was super sick. You're going to see that I play this very, very slowly. So I'm looking onto these guys in the front line. I'm just trying to do a quick dash in, try and again go in and get a big ulti, but they managed to peel me off, right? So now that all my cooldowns have been used, it's pretty tough to continue going. So I'm going to start backing away. Now, they end up chasing after us, right? And I actually kind of made a little bit of a mistake here. So I ended up flashing this. I think possibly I might have been able to keep walking after that and then E to the Atacon, but I think it was really risky. In fact, the more I look at it, I think it probably was just better to flash. Yeah, I think better to flash. I think I would have died. Oh, I definitely would have died. Okay, so not a mistake. Definitely flashed that. So I managed to get away, and then I go for a TP flank. Now, you're going to notice how I play this is like pretty... you're going to be pretty careful how you do this, right? So I'm flanking 5 people, right? Which is pretty scary. They've also got a lot of CC. So what am I going to do? Start by playing on the side of the fight, poke with Q, and kite away, right? Wait out their cooldowns. So what we just got out of the way was we got Janna Q, and I think we got Heimer something. Maybe Heimer didn't use anything, but we got Janna Q, which is kind of nice. Now, dash in here, proc phase rush. Once again, just run away, right? Abuse that phase rush. So I kite away, and then I'm able to go back in and kind of kite away. So you can see here, even though I took a really long time to get in, like see how patient I was, right? See how much damage I took? Like, even just going in here for literally just a moment, I actually almost died, Like, that's how quickly you can die, even when you're tanky, especially just because these guys are fed. So if I played this any faster, like if I dashed in here in a Janna Q, instantly would have died. If I got hit by the Heimer stun, again, instantly would have died. But I used my phase rush in order to dodge it. So that's basically the perfect team fight. If you can find some sort of flank, if you can choose your moments very carefully, abuse your phase rush, that's what really good Diana fighting should look like. Very last one I want to show is an example of kind of like what might happen to make a fight not go so well for you. So one of the worst things that can happen to you with Diana is getting chunked before the fight begins. So in this case, there's an extremely fed Kindred. I'm talking like a 10 kill or 12 kill Kindred or something. And you'll notice, even though I only show on her screen for a second, I lose so much health to her pet. I'm like a half health Diana before this fight even begins, which really sucks, right? Because it's very difficult for you to play the fight on 1 HP. So what are we going to do? Basically, we're going to have to wait and just be very, very careful again how you go in. So you see I immediately kite away. Now, I do dash in here. I can only do this because I have Zhonya. If I didn't have Zhonya, I probably wouldn't do this. Also, I'm kind of realizing that I'm probably just going to die here. Like, if I had been more healthy coming into the fight, I think it might have been fine. But just because I'm already so low, it's pretty unrealistic to expect to live the fight. But if you can get, like, a really big ulti, right? So, like, take here, for example. Like, if you can get an ult onto 3 squishy targets or whatever, like, that's pretty valuable, right? So I was very willing to die there, but yeah, I guess maybe it's not the best example in terms of the fight actually still went well, but I just want to kind of point out that, like, if you start the fight, like, without a flank and, like, being half HP and, like, missing flash, the fight's going to be way, way harder, and you might just die anyway. Like, if you looked at this fight and were like, okay, I died here and I just, like, can't figure out what I could have done better, the answer might be it's something before the fight even began. Like, it was nothing really to do with the fight itself and more to do with the 30 seconds lead up to that. So that's something worth thinking about, is, like, if you are reviewing your fights, make sure to rewind a little bit. and see if there's anything that led up to it. So I think that's basically it for Diana team fighting. The main things, again, I just want to kind of, instill into you is realizing that choosing your moments is very, very important. Playing around the phase rush as well, and not committing too early. Like, it is okay just to play for poke, wait for them to use cooldowns, kind of be a pest at the edge of the fight before you fully commit. And for our final section, let's just go over Diana's matchups. So you'll see for the most part that Diana just does have winning matchups. Like most of the matchups in the mid lane roster are in the easy or very easy. The most difficult things tend to be other champions that are very good at stat checking, or just like strong laners themselves, or have a lot of CCs. So you should probably stay away from maybe these 6 champions at the top, but honestly, you can play against them. You can make it work depending on what sort of setup you run. Like you can run a Bruiser build into a Kali or Galio, you can play Electrocute into Lysandra, etc. You can make it work. Now, pretty much everything else below that is going to be either a skill matchup or an easy matchup. So in skill matchups, it's going to be a lot about abusing your phase rush in order to avoid abilities. So for example, against things like, Cassio, Zed, or Zoe or whatever, you can use your phase rush in order to avoid a lot of damage. Now, these can kind of be difficult, a lot of them, if they just kind of sit back and wait for team fights. Like, Zed actually has a stupid amount of range, so he can farm quite safely in the laning phase. Things like Cassio or Nivea, even though you can beat them in lane, are pretty annoying in team fights and stuff like that. But again, there are ways to win, right? Like, you can set up ganks on them. A lot of the time, you beat them in the side lane. But these can be like a little more difficult. So you can definitely pick into them, but like, just kind of don't expect to instantly, auto win the trades like you would against the other champs. Now, pretty much everything else is going to be in easy or very easy. So these champions, there's a variety of win conditions, right? Some of them, if they have CC or whatever, you might not be able to immediately dash onto them, but generally those are the champs that you either outscale or can poke out a lane or have a big side lane win condition against or whatever. And anything that doesn't have CC or anything that really struggles to actually just fight back in the trade is very easy to play against. Anything that you can just like E onto directly is just a sitting duck. Also, anything that is really reliant on roaming or like picking up random kills, you can think of things like, Katarina or Kiana, Fizz, etc. The moment they leave lane, if you just go for the turret, especially if it's cannon wave, especially if you have grubs, you're gonna, you're gonna snowball so incredibly hard. So basically, I would say it's mostly just about knowing, again, how to play the matchup. Most matchups play out kind of the same, but what I more mean is, like, is this a matchup where you need to start with A instead of starting with Q? Or is this a matchup where you need everything up in order to trade? Or is this a matchup where you need to bait out their cooldowns and stuff like that? Overall, though, you could probably break them into a few different categories, and most matchups will play out sort of the same. Other than that, I don't think there's really much else to add. If you guys have any matchup questions, obviously put them in the comments section below. Don't forget, again, to check out the link I put in the pinned comment about the more extended version of this guide if you do want to see more laning examples, more team fighting examples, and kind of a deeper discussion. Other than that, any questions just generally about Diana, put them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.